Hello and welcome to India's World. Today we're taking you back to the Swiss Alps, which until a few years back was still associated with Bollywood love songs. But this year, particularly last week, the focus changed entirely, with the Prime Minister of India, Mr. Narendra Modi, delivering the plenary address at the World Economic Forum in Davos. The annual gathering started in 1971 as the European Management Forum, when West European business leaders gathered to discuss how European firms could catch up to America's more advanced techniques. But through the years, the Davos Forum has evolved into a much more global event, attracting not just business, but political leaders as well, personalities, celebrities, and you name it, and they're there. So does Davos now signify a change in the world order? Joining us on the discussion today on this, we've got Mr. Salman Haidar, former Foreign Secretary, Pant, Head of the Strategic Studies at ORF, Subhomoy Bhattacharjee, Consulting Editor with Business Standard. Thank you so much, gentlemen, for joining us here. Ambassador Haidar, starting with you, this year's theme was creating a shared order in a fractured world. The words fractured world itself, does that signify a change that we're seeing as far as global order is concerned?
Well, one takes for granted that the world will be fractured. There are things happening which are uncomfortable, and they have to be borne with, they have to be dealt with, and answers found to some of the problems that assail different parts of the world. Davos has become a preeminent forum for discussing issues of this nature. It brings the great and the good from all over the world to Davos to share thoughts and views on the situation, and to come up with ideas that can make a difference and that can be helpful in this time when a lot of things have a tendency to go wrong, and we need some counterbalancing efforts to ensure that nothing gets totally off the rails. So I think Davos has established itself as a place of great value. The fact that so many of the leaders of the world come there year after year tells its own tale, that they find value in being there, and this was evident this time also at Davos.
Absolutely, and we'll also talk about the important points that were of course established in this particular session this time around. But before that, Subhomoy, considering how it is the World Economic Forum, so it's of course a platform where, you've got these business leaders, of course, there. You've got business journalists, of course, who, of course, throng the area there, and they try to take out what is it that's going to be crucial for the coming year. Through the years, have you seen that it has, of course, taken itself more beyond economic affairs, and it's become also a platform where political agenda can be set? Do you think so?
Yeah, but just one caveat. I haven't been to Davos, so I can't say personally what what it would be like.
But while you're reporting, when you do, yes.
The one thing that's very clear is it's a networking club. It has been the preeminent networking club for the rich, and so what happens on the stage is often far less interesting than what happens off the stage in terms of who makes what deals. In fact, that's what Davos is principally about. Gives a chance for the beginning of the year for business and political leaders to get to size each other up before making investment plans in each other's territory. So that's Davos. The fact that they're talking about fractured world is very interesting, because Davos had always had a very, sort of a very feel that, things are fairly okay. It's a bastion of capital, and things have been smooth, things have been now. The fact that they're talking about gender issues about inclusive growth, shows that there are a lot of questions coming up. How much percentage of the 1% of the world's wealth do they corner? And what does it leave for the rest of the world? So, these challenges were the top of the mind. And also the fact that at present, in fact, that's very interesting thing about Davos, is that if you look at the Western world, whether it's Trump, he's not really the popular leader of choice for a large number of people. Angela Merkel, she's not really there in terms of being the boss who's really making the position, because she's lost her majority.
That's right. They're both, in fact, unstable domestically.
So essentially, there is a lot of discussion, and I think Harsh and I, we had discussed this thing earlier, that it's basically becoming an India-China sort of a thing. So there, and India and China are a new entrant, so to speak. I mean, we have been there before, we have made a presence, but still, it isn't really these two countries which are, you associate with the world capital order.
Yes.
So I mean, at least India definitely isn't. So where does that leave the discussion or the dialogue at Davos? So is it largely one should look at the off stage, or should one look at the center stage where people were giving speeches? Was that so very significant? So, it was a very what I might call an open stage at Davos with no clear established leadership.
All right. But then last year when we did hear the plenary address by Xi Jinping, Harsh, what he did talk about was open trade, globalization, and those were the themes that you did hear through last year. I mean, that was the kind of feel, at least, that China was, of course, advocating it wherever it went. But that was the feel also as far as other economies were concerned, as far as even when you see world leaders talking, this was the feel that you got. Of course, Trump reversed it all around, but nonetheless, that was the feel perhaps that was reverberating across the world. So if you talk about setting the agenda for the year ahead, what do you make of Prime Minister Modi's speech, where he, of course, named those three challenges: terrorism, protectionism against globalization, and also climate change? How do you take it forward now?
See, this is, I think, a phase in Davos's evolution, which perhaps the founders of Davos never really envisioned. Because the idea was that, look, this is a phase of globalization, the end of history phase, where this thing would continue, where it won't be challenged the way it is being challenged today. So I think the challenges that are now coming to the system, the established order, are both internal and external. On the one hand, you have, as I think was being mentioned, Trump is challenging this because there is a consensus growing within America that free trade is not a good, and therefore America first policy. Similarly, you have problems in Europe where Britain is challenging the whole European Union project. And you are looking at this world where there are no established leaders who can defend that. So whether it's Trump saying America first, or other leaders embroiled in their own domestic problems. And here then last year you had Mr. Xi Jinping then approaching the world as if he's going to be the guarantor of that order. Now that's very difficult, I think, for a lot of liberal democracies, especially the Western liberal democracies, to come to terms with, because China is not seen as a guarantor of that order. So therefore, I think India's presence at the center, India's message to the world that, look, we are also in favor of free trade, we want free trade, we are not in favor of protectionism, is a very strong message to go out from a liberal democracy that which has many of the same values with the West that perhaps the founders of the Davos would have liked India to celebrate. And I think that was what seemed to be happening. It was India's moment in many ways. It remains to be seen whether India had, whether India captured that, because that's a long-term aspect, and there are many other aspects to that. Simply, a simple speech will not make that much of a difference.
That's right.
But I think what government does in terms of opening it up would be an important message that probably I think New Delhi wants to send out and the world wants to hear.
The speech, of course, was successful, Subhomoy, but as far as the Indian delegation, and the biggest ever, in fact, that India took with it, the Indian Prime Minister took along. The reports, of course, were quite positive. That the reaction there was positive, the involvement was positive. How do you read into that?
Well, that the reports would be positive was, I mean, as Harsh is pointing out so rightly, that was expected. I mean, India, there's no established leadership now. Davos is at a point of question. So definitely you don't expect, I mean, Modi's statements, and he wasn't coming in as a new prime minister. He's already established 4 years. So it was expected that he would be making a powerful pitch. That he did, wonderful and all that. I mean, that's definitely there. What was possibly lacking was India taking it further. There's now no way that India could say that we are not part of, say, the World Security Network. What happens? Now, for instance, Pacific Ocean, for instance, it's now always talked of as Indo-Pacific issues. Now, that's a very significant hyphenation. Now, these are the sort of stuff in which, if India is being mentioned, it carries with it the fact that India will then have to step up to the breach, get up and get into those positions where it has always been taking the position that, we stand and let the others decide on it, and we have our core issues on which we sort of stick to it. That, I think, I mean, those are some of the issues that probably didn't get discussed. the fact that his speech was very anticipated, the fact that it was widely reported, I mean, that's something that comes with the turf. India now makes, I mean, it's a very important place for the world to do business in. But what are the issues that India is saying going ahead? What are the stuff? I mean, the fact that it will be saying that, yes, say, FDI will be opened, or others would be there for the ministries and others to say.
Yes.
But what does the message that the Prime Minister of India is conveying? He did convey some of India's soft power issues. That definitely that's an important point. But beyond that, also, I think there are some of those gaps which went unaddressed.
All right. But, you know, Ambassador Haidar, last year we saw the plenary address by Xi Jinping. This year you're seeing it, we saw it by Prime Minister Modi. Does this also signify that the competition, aspirations, interests of the West, or for that matter Europe, has moved beyond America and beyond the other European nations? They're, of course, looking at various other, you know, power centers, if you could call it that. And that in itself shows that it's an open field, really.
Well, I don't know how to respond to that particular point, whether people have moved on to other aspects. I think that this is a continuous dialogue, and we must not expect...
What do you make of the interests that they are showing to China, that they're showing to economies like China and India? What do you make of that?
The interest of, yeah, well, that interest is bound to grow, and it is growing. We've been seeing that so far as India is concerned, and we just reminded of this, the expectations have increased. What we are meant to be doing globally, the burdens that we are supposed to be assuming, the initiatives that we are supposed to be taking, which we are indeed taking, have now enlarged, and India's role as a global entity is not what it was when Davos first started. Today, I think there's a continuous upgrading of the Indian contribution, the Indian role. There's no point in trying to see it as a very narrow business, saying what advantage do we get from it. I think it's more a question of having a useful and mutually beneficial dialogue among the different participants, and that is the one part of the Davos experience. Yes. that people go to exchange views, and this exchange itself has value. And I think this was very much on display. Some of the themes that our Prime Minister identified, including, say, climate change. Now, climate change is a very interesting issue, because it is one area in which at different stages of our parallel paths, India and China have been close to each other, where we have been able to find common ground. And today also, there is, it isn't an embattled position where India and China take on the rest of the world, but still there are mutualities which should be identified and respected. And I think that this is the sort of thing that can come out of a forum like Davos, where you find a certain sort of convergence of views and interests.
All right. Harsh, how do you read it, the interest that China and India have been generating in the past few years? Do you also see it in that way? It's just a natural progression because of the fact that it is growing as, you know, they are fast-growing economies. But how much of it is only to do with that? Or do they also see them as a player in other realms as well, not to do with just the economy front?
See, at one level, it is about the major economic centers emerging elsewhere. So India and China can no longer be ignored, I think, as Mr. Haidar pointed it out. At another level, it is also about, all right, so if these economies are growing, what can they do in terms of providing public goods? And I think that's a conversation that is beginning to happen now more and more. There is a great expectation that India would resume more of the burdens of a global actor, global player. What can it do in terms of security, in terms of trade? I think these are the questions that are constantly being asked of India and China, of course. In some cases, Indians and Chinese policymakers are open. For example, trade, we have seen a great opening from a position where the two countries used to hide behind protectionism, now openly articulating the need for no protection in the global economic order, and also restructuring of the global economic institutions. I think that's also a demand that has been put forth, and these countries are making that demand. At other levels, I think this discussion on security issues still remains very contentious, because some of the issues on which perhaps the West has a view is different from where New Delhi sees it, or even Beijing sees it. So that, I think, is a conversation that is beginning to happen, and more you would find India and China being in the spotlight, because it would be expected that if your economies are so big, if you are now demanding that you should be part of the global decision making, then what is it that you're going to contribute to that global order?
Absolutely. And, you know, taking it also away from Davos and just talking about, since we're talking about a new world order, Subhomoy, do you also see an indication coming that, you know, now, you know, how it was a few decades back, one power center in a certain sense, at least as far as the global order was concerned. Now we're actually seeing more of regional power centers, and that is how, you know, the following years are going to, you know, proceed. You're going to have multiple poles of power, and you're going to, and you know, how is your relationship with your neighborhood? That is also going to factor in, and you know, in that sense, the world has realized you cannot have one power center. So, you know, in that sense, is it why it's interesting and exciting to see this open up really for economies like India?
Exactly, Tracy, and that's why we are saying it's a fractured world. The unipolar order has definitely gone away, but whether it's gone away and whether there are other power centers which are stepping in is a work in progress. We don't know, because frankly the capacities of the economies that are coming in, jostling, are very different, very varied. For instance, India has a larger global understanding, but it's you know, if one measures it in terms of its GDP power, it's still a very middle income country. Now a country like as the ambassador pointed out, China, for instance, is a big order, but it's not a country whose global understanding is often understood. I mean, appreciated by others, because it's got a different positioning. So you know, so there are I wouldn't call it a dystopian world, but I would definitely say that there is far more questions now about who leads and in which issues. So you find in climate issues, for instance, you find the top polluter is not leading. It's China and India, and of course the European Union, which is leading. But in terms of, say, migration issues, now Europe has got a different problem there. Is it able to lead? It's not. Then on say movement of capital, which are the countries which would be willing to? Asia is more open. In fact, Asia, as we saw, the ASEAN nations and India talking more about, you know, the need to conclude the RCEP. They're also talking of TPP. It's almost dead and done in USA. So you see, there are various countries, and in fact, so there are various groups which are actually almost coming up. So it's a complicated situation, very fluid, where there are lots of interests which are often at conflict.
Yes. And
that makes almost very difficult to figure out that whether the Davos ice is actually hiding the problems more, or is there a melt somewhere around and a problem coming along which could flood the cool confines. So it essentially, I would say that whenever one looks at Davos or any that sort of a situation, that sort of a meeting, it throws up more questions rather than answers.
All right. How much of this shift, Harsh, do you think is also, you know, to a certain extent can be attributed to how America is on the world order at the moment, you know, with its policies, and not to do with Trump, because we've seen a gradual change of policies in, you know, in American administrations. We've seen a gradual change, and Trump, of course, brings another facet to it altogether. But how much of this shift that we are seeing at the moment can also be attributed to how America is also changing?
I think a large part of it perhaps is because of the unique domestic debate that is happening in America. America, the post has been at the guarantor of the post Second World War order, both economic and political. So I think what we are now looking at is the leader of the pack, almost the guarantor of that order, saying, well, I'm not interested in that order, and something needs to give. So I think the debate there, both in terms of the economic order and in terms of the security order that America has created, is going to have far-reaching consequences, and you will have other actors who are then going to rejig their own positions vis-a-vis not simply America but also vis-a-vis the global order. So the questions about global order are fundamentally linked to what the most important player in that matrix is going to do, and I think in that case Mr. Trump has merely accentuated some of those trends. He's a reflection or a manifestation of those trends. The trends go back earlier. Even during Mr. Obama, we were talking of a gradual retrenchment from the global order. We were talking of a debate on perhaps trade that was not as vibrant as it used to be in the 1990s. I mean, the only issues where perhaps Mr. Trump has taken this forward is climate change, where he basically said that this is not something that he's interested in. But I think that is also a reflection of the domestic turbulence in America about the costs of global trade, about the costs of global economic order that they have created. So I think some of these questions will not be resolved tomorrow, even if Mr. Trump goes away from the scene. They will continue. And I think so for the world at large, the issue is how do you deal with the consequences of this change and how you manage those consequences. And therefore, fractured nature of contemporary global order is a reflection, perhaps, of this underlying reality, that we are coming to terms with somehow the decimation or weakening of the post-Second World War order led by the Americans.
All right. And coming back to Davos and talking about the significance of it, Mr. Haidar, we know it's an informal meeting that takes place, but we've obviously seen a lot of political activity that happens. There have been, of course, some interesting developments that have taken place in the past few years. So keeping all that in mind and where it stands at the moment as far as these meetings of world leaders are concerned, where do you think it stands? And for that, the very fact that India was given such an important position this year around, what comfort should India get of it? What positive signal should India get of it?
Well, we started this discussion a few minutes ago with the sense that of fracture, of change, not necessarily a very comfortable change. Now, maybe we should return to that point and ask ourselves how far matters are changing and how uncomfortable we feel in India and in other places, but countries that have been comfortably established in a particular set of circumstances and within an order, but now may find are finding that they are both the agents of change and, shall we say, I won't call it victims, but certainly people who experience change. And these are new challenges that have come up, and not always very comfortable ones. So I think that Davos should not conceal beneath a cloak of agreeable and exchanges the fact that things are happening, and we see it particularly in our own area, in our own region, in our own continent, where new developments are taking place that compel us to think of making adjustments, whether it is in climate. We've spoken about climate, about terrorism, about different ways of economic ways which are perhaps today more readily or more contained, or for which answers have been offered. But elsewhere, there is a time of churning before us, and we have to be prepared for it.
All right, you summed it there. Thank you so much. It is a time of churning and we have to be prepared for that. Not just offer, of course, what are the problems at hand, but also perhaps offer solutions. And that is where we will actually show our true leadership. Thank you so much, gentlemen, for joining me on India's World. We look forward to your feedback. So write in to us at indiasworld.feedback@gmail.com. That's it for the moment from me. Thank you.